right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to part one of the two-part series on trauma-informed supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We are very excited to have Dr. Karyn Harvey with us to share her extensive knowledge and experience. My name is Danielle Daly. I am the Professional Development Coordinator here with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping things, and then I'm going to pass on over to Karyn. As always, everyone is muted and your cameras are disabled. Please use that chat box feature for any comments, questions, any resources you want to share. You can also use that Q&A for questions to make sure that those don't get missed in the chat box. Karyn will take some breaks throughout in order to be able to answer those questions. And we'll kind of take a 10-minute break a couple times throughout, just to give everyone a little bit of time to go to the bathroom, grab a snack, that sort of thing. We will run from 9 to 12 today. Please visit ICPN.org. You can view our upcoming workshops and review some past workshops that are posted to our YouTube. Please sign up to receive those future mailings. You can be the first one to know about those upcoming workshops. If you visit our webpage, it's on the top right-hand corner. You can also get information about our 7th annual conference, which is happening this month in Springfield and Naperville. Springfield is March 28th and Naperville is March 29th. So be sure to check that out. CEs, continuing education, please give me about 14 days to get those out to everyone. We do have a lot of people registered for this two-part series. So give me about 14 days. If for some reason after those 14 days you have not received them, then go ahead and reach out to me. My email address, I did put it with my name. So I will also put that in the chat box along with all the other information that I just provided to you. But that is all I have. So Karyn.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here with all of you. And thank you so much for spending your morning with me. And thank you for bringing me in. I am really excited. So I'm going to share my screen, and I love all the good morning greetings. You know, people from the Midwest are so nice. I'm like so excited. We can be a little harsh over here on the East Coast. I mean, we don't mean to be, but you know, it just kind of happens because we're just like moving a little too fast. But I love all these greetings. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to share my slide. Here we go. And hopefully everybody can see that. And good morning to all of you. So what I figured I would do, if it's okay with everybody, is that I will every hour, you know, an hour from now and then another hour from now, we'll take a 10-minute break and do what you need to do. And then we'll also, right before we take the break, we'll do some Q&A. So I won't really, I'm not very good at monitoring the chat and speaking. So I know Danielle's going to help, but if you have a question and you put it in, we're definitely going to get to it. And if we have so many questions that we can't, I'm always happy to email responses if needed. So thank you. I will be sharing a lot of materials, or some, right? I never know what I'm going to say, quite honestly. That's why I have slides, because otherwise I just go off and tell stories and make a lot of jokes. So I have slides, so there will be some kind of cohesion. But I do want to share that I will be referring to materials in the next, today and next week, that are on KarynHarvey.org. So I have a lot of free materials that you can use, workbooks and little assessment tools and things like that. They're all free. So they're at KarynHarvey.org. Some of the stories I tell can be a little bit rough because life is like that. So I just want to say, you know, if it's too much, or if you need to go watch, you know, the 2nd or 3rd hour of the Today Show or whatever you want to watch, I get it. Don't watch CNN because that's even more upsetting. I'm only kidding. You know what I mean? So whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, please take care of yourself, because every now and then It's a lot. And I'll try to do warnings, but oftentimes I forget because I'm just talking about the story. So totally understand if you need to just take a break. The first thing I want to say is the most important thing I have to say to everybody here. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you for all you do. And in particular, thank you for surviving the last 3 years. And you're still here. Look at you. This is great. I know you're still here because why would you want to take this course or need the CEUs if you had quit? Yay for you. You didn't quit. And I bet if I told you 3 years ago, next month, all this little stuff that's in the news about this, little virus is going to blow up. And for at least 2 years and close to 3, you're going to have to figure out how to do everything differently. You're going to have to take care of people. You're going to have to support folks. You're going to have to support the supporters. Many of you had kids at home. My heart is with you. Oh my gosh, I was so glad my kids were grown. Geez. Some of us had elderly parents to take care of, and that was challenging. It was all so challenging in addition to being in this field and supporting people. And many of you supported supporters, right? You were there for the supporters and kept things going on. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd like you to take a minute. And what I want you to do is think about something you're really proud of that you accomplished during COVID and congratulate yourself. Because if I had told you this 3 years ago that you were going to go through this, I bet many of you would have said, no way, there's no way we can do this. There's no way I wouldn't be able to do it. I can't take care of this, 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 and this, but you did it. So think about those amazing things that you did and congratulate yourself, right? Because COVID was its own kind of trauma. And I can't talk about trauma without talking about this. And tragically, we lost a lot of people, So what I always like to do when I begin all of the talks that I've done for the last several years is make sure that we don't forget anybody. We lost a lot of folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We lost staff. Many of us lost parents or friends or all of the above, relatives, coworkers. So I'm going to take a moment of silence to honor all those lives. Thank you. They will not be forgotten. I believe they're still with us in many ways. And we need to take care of ourselves through this, because we can't take care of anybody else if we're not taking care of ourselves. So that's a big theme, right? Please take care of yourself and do what you need to do for you, because we just went through a very tough time. And we don't really know as a society how to deal with grief very well. You lose someone, you get your 3-day leave, you get your bereavement leave, and then you're supposed to be right back and rolling, and it's tough. It's tough. These losses affect us. So Dr. Toni Miles, who's a specialist in grief, says that bereavement is actually a public health issue. And she actually stated that during the last several years, it's been one of the most important public health issues that we have not been addressing. So, in human services, we're very sensitive to other people, right? We're always thinking about what they need and what we can do and how we can help. But we have to help ourselves and, take that minute for yourself. And grief isn't something that just gets wrapped up and then we're okay and everything's great. Okay, I'm over it now, right? One of the mistakes we've made in the grief literature is actually to accept Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and grieving as stages that we all go through. But when she talked about her stages of grief, she really meant to talk about the experience of the dying. It was in her book on death and dying. And, she talks about denial, then bargaining, then anger, then depression, and then acceptance. But honestly, for those of us left living, it doesn't work like that. We may be depressed, we may be angry, we may struggle, but we just don't come to some happy package of being wrapped up in, okay, I'm resolved now, right? So that's where self-care is so important for any of you struggling in this way, right? Because we have to take care of ourselves and know that some days you might not be 100%. And there might be days when you just have to say, I can't do it today. And that's okay. It's okay. A day, I'm sorry for all the bosses out there, but you might have to take that mental health day or just take extra care of yourself, because what we went through was phenomenal. And we feel like we just have to keep going, right? We work and we get things done and we go, go, go. But sometimes it overwhelms us. So, I just want to say thank you for all you've done through this monumental period that we never anticipated and couldn't have even dreamed of in our worst dreams. And thank you that you kept going. And please do what you need to do for you as things come up, because it's, we humans, stuff comes up. We have to allow ourselves to grieve. The Mayo Clinic says it's very important for people to give themselves the space they need to go through what they have to go through. And it's not a linear thing. It's kind of in waves. So thank you again. And, you are important. Can't do much for others unless you do for you. And there were all kinds of losses, not just death, but, everybody went through a lot. Let's talk about the folks we support, because people with IDD went through so much during this period. And before I get into my big talk about trauma, that's what I do, is trauma. But before I get into that, I really like to talk about what just happened and the trauma of COVID and what happened to people with IDD. So there have been a lot of losses. Many things happened to them. A lot of people lost their jobs, right? Everywhere I go, people are telling me about job losses. I do therapy with folks with IDD as well. I'm a psychologist with a private practice, or actually I work with a practice in my practice. And I work with a lot of people. I was able to do a group from July of 2020 to June of 2021. We got funding and we did 3 groups actually every week. And people just struggled. They kept asking when their program was going to open back up, when they were going to see their friends. Some wanted to see their family. A couple of people lost people, and there was grief. Sometimes people with IDD don't get the support in grieving. We were so lucky that we got a grant. We were able to do group therapy through Zoom. But often we can't have those opportunities, and people don't get what they need. So I went to New York last month and was doing a workshop with a very large agency, a series of workshops. And we had to talk about COVID because so many people had been lost. So I was partly in New Jersey and then partly in New York. And when I was in New Jersey, we had just small groups meetings so that I could support people with what they've been through. We did a lot of small groups. And when I was in New Jersey, this woman shared a story of being with somebody in the very beginning, like that second week of March. And the woman she had worked with for years got very sick. She went with her to the hospital, and it was right before they stopped allowing people to go in with them. So she went in with the person, and that woman passed away right there in the ER. And this person who'd worked with her for 20 years, who was a house manager, you could feel her still grieving, right? Still suffering that loss. And it turned out that that was the first person who died of COVID in the state of New Jersey. And when I asked about how the other people who lived with her, the folks receiving supports, how they were doing, she said, we all are going through it. So oftentimes they're not getting the support with grief. And I asked, could they get counseling? Couldn't find anyone to do the counseling. I hear this so many times. People say, well, I'm not trained in working with people with IDD, right? I'm not trained. Well, we have to bridge that gap. And so they are struggling on their own. And then folks in New York were sharing so many losses, house managers who passed away. There was one group home where 2 out of the 5 people passed away. And how do you go through that, right? What is that impact? And often we don't support people with IDD in their grief. I'm sure you do, but we all are struggling with this. And maybe we silver line that loss, like, oh yes, they're in heaven, everything's great, don't worry. It's hard to access grief counseling. Everywhere I go, I talk about the importance of it, and people will always say the same thing. Well, where do you find the therapist to do it? So in many places that I've always worked inside a provider agency, up until recently, I've been in provider agencies, like doing clinical supports. And what we did was we would write the behavior plans and do all that. And then we did the counseling right there, because it was an unfunded mandate, because we couldn't always get set up. Right now, an agency I'm working with is set up and has found ways to get medical assistance and Medicaid, work it all out. But we tried to figure out how to do it, because what we found was that a lot of people were really stuck with grief. A lot of people were really suffering from past losses. And so doing that grief counseling was so critical. Do we miss grief when it's manifested as a behavioral issue? We sure do. We sure do. Oftentimes people are showing us their pain, and maybe it looks like aggression or property destruction or refusal because they're so shut down. And maybe we even judge people for their symptoms of PTSD without realizing it. I know I have. I know I missed it. That's why I'm doing penance here, because so much of the time I did miss it. So folks that we support have been through a lot and really need to process it and I'm so grateful that we're starting to come out. I work and consult with some day programs who, opening back up, but they're having some hard times because some people don't want to come, right? And I'm sure some of you are seeing that as well, because after a while, you're just so isolated that you cocoon and you're kind of afraid because there were so many scary things that we heard for years. So now people can be afraid to come back out. I think we've gone through 3 phases in the challenge of COVID. So I think that the first phase was just fear, right? Remember washing your groceries? It was terrifying. Yeah, putting your mail out in the sun. Did anybody do that? We did that. Oh, mail, I can't touch that mail. We didn't know, right? Washing our hands 10,000 times. Then we went through this long period of isolation. We all did. That really affected folks with IDD. Especially so many people were finally starting to have lives in the community, finally starting to reconnect, right? Finally getting a volunteer job or a regular job or be a part of some kind of social group or something. And then all shut down. I saw that in the groups that I did. And then I think phase 3, we've had a lot of anxiety. And as I said, people not wanting to come back out, not wanting to connect, and also kind of that fatigue. Like, oh, this just wore us out. It was a lot. It was a lot. And it really affected the folks we support. So I traveled, I still traveled the second year, not 2020, but in 2021, between variants, I went to a conference in North Dakota. And I really learned a lot at this conference. And where I learned was in this one workshop. And let me tell you the story of the workshop. I was there, I was supposed to give the opening talk, blah, 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 hello. And, did that. And then I was supposed to do a workshop to talk about actually the mental health effects of COVID on folks with IDD. So I had my PowerPoints, I had a few little preliminary statistics, you know, I had it all out there. And in walks a number of people with IDD and their staff, because the staff thought that it was a workshop for them, right? And so I'm like, ooh, take that PowerPoint down. I'm not talking about people with them right there, as though they don't exist, no. Maybe years ago I would have, but I've grown up a little bit, hello. But that's where I really learned. So I asked people to just share, and it was a large group, we passed the mic around and let people share what they had been through and how hard it was. And people talked about their confusion, and they talked about missing their day program and missing their families and, you know, all those things, right? Jobs that had been lost. So as they shared, there was one man who said, you know, I want that. And he was an older man. His name was Philip, right? And he was in a wheelchair. This was in North Dakota, right? So they were from, you know, a very rural area in North Dakota. And he's like, I'll tell you how it was. I'll tell you how it was. And he told his story. Wow. He said, well, first thing, we didn't know what was going on. The day program shut down. Couldn't go to the day program. I couldn't see my buddies. I didn't know why. Then we started watching the TV, and we saw bodies on the TV, dead people. Remember we saw that? We saw that. But we were, you know, staying home. We watched movies. We ate popcorn. Wasn't so bad. But then Jimmy got sick. And Jimmy had to go to the hospital. And Jimmy went to the hospital, and we had to go in our rooms, right? So they had to quarantine. But he's not explaining it that way because it still didn't, you know, he wasn't really clear why still. And he's like, we had to stay in our rooms, and we had to eat in our rooms, and we couldn't even sit together, and we couldn't even watch movies or eat popcorn together. And no, we had to stay in our rooms. How upsetting, right? And then Jimmy came back. So we came back out, but now we had to get masks. So then, right, everyone's wearing masks. We had to wear our masks. And we could watch TV. We watched some movies. We had dinner. It was good. But then Johnny got sick. And we had to go back to our rooms. And we had to stay in the rooms. We had to eat in the rooms again. I didn't even have a TV. I had radio. I listened to my radio. Oh. But then he came back. He was okay. And we were okay for a while. No day program, but we were okay. But then Linda got sick. And the staff person who's sitting next to him put her head down, right? Linda got sick. She went to the hospital, but she never came back. And that staff person starts crying. And he leans over and he's comforting her. He said, don't worry, Gina. Don't worry, Gina. She's in heaven. Don't worry, Gina. And he's comforting her. And I was like, oh my gosh. So you could just see he went through so much. None of it was totally clear, right? It wasn't clear to any of us. But it was like these experiences, and they were scary and they were hard. It was trauma. And then, you know, someone he clearly loved died. And then he's worried about his staff who clearly loved her as well. Staff went through so much. DSPs went through so much, right? And he's trying to comfort her. And then at the very end, I passed the mic around and I said, okay, who wants to have some final words? You know, we had just been sharing. I learned so much. And this was right between variants, like between Delta and Omicron, in and out. And we passed that mic around, and Philip, I want that, took the mic. He had Parkinson's, so he was kind of shaky. And he said, "Live life to the fullest." Whoa. Wasn't that the lesson? Wasn't he right? That was the gift, right? Whoa. Thank you, Philip. You are so right. So, there were so many lessons. And in so many ways, so many of you, I know, supported people in ways that no one knows about, right? There's a saying from Nichiren Daishonin, a Buddhist scholar from the 1200s. It said, unseen virtue brings visible reward, right? So many of you did so many things that were unseen. So many ways you supported people. So many ways you helped. And here we are, So thank you again. And for all the people we support, everybody's been through something. It was very impactful, very impactful. And as we move forward, it's no surprise that folks are having some difficulties, that isolation had an impact, right? So let's talk more about trauma, just to get everybody totally depressed. So that's the way it's going to be. And I have to apologize, because I'll try to make it a little bit cheerful, and I'll be telling a lot of stories, but not all of them are that good. But the thing is that people also heal. So what I'm going to do today's the hard day, right? And then next week is going to be the uplifting day, hopefully. But today I want to talk about all the sources of trauma in the lives of people with IDD, because it's a reality. And I'm going to tell you how I came to this. I got it wrong. I often thought that people were just doing their thing and having a behavioral issue because they wanted some, attention. Yes, I'm ashamed to say I even said that back in the early days when I was hired in my 20s as a behavior specialist. I was hired for this agency, and that was my job. And I made a lot of mistakes. But then I started to see. And once my eyes were open and I started to see, it took me a while. I started to realize that many of the behavioral issues were two things. Number one, they were symptoms of people's post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is a reality. It's not just something vets get. We've learned this, right? Back in the day, we used to think it was just vets, people coming from war. And they were so damaged and it was horrible, but that the rest of us never had trauma. Now we realize, and once you put your trauma glasses on, you start to see it everywhere. So I started to realize this isn't folks being manipulative. It's not people being attention seeking or, trying to pull everyone in or do whatever. It's trauma. Number one, symptoms of PTSD. And number two, people sometimes feel like they have to use their behavior to protect themselves because they don't feel protected and they don't feel safe. And that's a reality as well. So symptoms of PTSD, as well as efforts to protect the self. Let's look at the sources of trauma with folks with IDD. So much sexual abuse, so much, right? I was very fortunate to meet Joe Shapiro, who's a brilliant journalist, and did a special on NPR special on the sexual abuse of people with intellectual disabilities. And he interviewed so many people, and it was really riveting to meet and spend time with him. And he said, it's story after story after story. And then he shared that he went to the Bureau of Justice and asked them to analyze the incidence of sexual assault of people with intellectual disabilities versus people without intellectual disabilities. And what was, the ratio or the difference. And they came back to him and they said, people with intellectual disabilities are 7 times more likely to be sexually abused than people without. And this has been my experience. It's actually higher because that didn't include the reporting stream of provider agencies when the police are not called. It was only police reports or people who don't report. And we know there's a lot of that. So sexual abuse is very intense. Physical abuse, bullying. Bullying is quite a reality, and bullying creates serious trauma. We now see that, like we see people committing suicide as a result of bullying. We see homicide as a result of bullying. Bullying deeply affects people. Human beings are emotional creatures wired for connection. And when that connection goes south, or when they're rejected, or when they're humiliated, it causes intense pain. Exclusion causes pain as well. There's a really important study done by Eisenberger where she looked at people who were excluded just from a simple computer game. She had participants, and they were supposed to play a computer game with 2 other people. They said, you just have to, she called it cyberball, you just catch the ball with the mouse, and you work with 2 other people in 2 other rooms, but you won't see each other. Well, she lied, which is what we psychologists do. We lie, we play tricks on people, and we see what they do when we play tricks on them, and then we write about it and we get published. I did it, but I didn't get published. But I did it to graduate. I'm not proud. I'm not proud. Yes, I did some trickery for my dissertation. I admit it. But so she did some major trickery, and because there were not 2 people in the other room, it was actually just a computer program that would throw the ball to the participant and then stopped throwing the ball to the participant. And every single participant's brain was wired up so they could see where the brain was firing. And every brain fired in their singular anterior cortex, which is your pain center. Everybody, when they stopped getting the ball, started firing as though they were in pain, because it went on like another 15, 20 minutes of them not getting the ball thrown to them. Everybody experienced that as though they had broken their foot. Ding, 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 pain center. And, I thought at the time, well, maybe that was just a bunch of overly sensitive college freshmen who miss their mothers. That's who we use for research, right? We make them be participants for their Psych 101 credit. I know, it's wrong. I did it too. It's not the right thing to do, but we did it. And the reality was I got a gift from the universe. I found out the most popular kid in my class when I was teaching years later, I was teaching at UBalt, University of Baltimore. I was teaching psychology of trauma to graduate students who were, getting their degrees in counseling. And I'm telling them about this study. And this one kid raises his hand. He is the most together, the one the girls always flirt with, good looking lacrosse player. He went to Duke, had it all together. And he raised his hand and said, I was in that study. And sure enough, they had replicated it there. I was in that study. I was in that study. It was horrible. It was so frustrating. I was like, really? No, you just didn't get a ball on a computer. Come on now. He's like, no, you don't understand. It really is really horrible. I hated it. And this was like one of the most together guys in the class. And there weren't that many guys in the class. You know how that is, right? Human services. Being excluded is pain. We are wired to connect, because if we weren't, the species would have died off. We'd have just gotten on each other's nerves hundreds of years ago and never hooked up, right? So we have to be biologically wired to want each other and want to be connected. And so who gets excluded? Folks with IDD. And finally, institutionalization. Well, I don't have to tell you about that. I'm sure that many of you there have worked with folks who have been in the institution back in the day. Horrible, horrible, right? So much trauma. One of my first jobs, that first job as behavior specialist, well, it turned out I was also the janitorial instructor. And after 6 months, I became a house manager. It was good. I mean, hey, you go with the flow. And I was the intake person. I also did a little bit of HR. broke some laws, as I now know, but didn't mean to ask people the wrong questions. So there I was, and I was the intake person, and then I was given the task of going to Rosewood, which was the institution in Maryland, up on the Baltimore side. We had Great Oaks near Washington, D.C., and we had Rosewood near Baltimore, about 20 minutes north. And that was my job, was to go there and pick people to take into our agency. And our agency was one of the, just a handful of new startup agencies. That's why we had so many jobs, right? We had no money, few employees. And my agency's job was to take those, figure out people and give them supports. And that's kind of where the funding had come from, because the state was gradually starting to deinstitutionalize. So I was in charge of that. What I saw, I cannot describe. People naked, screaming, people rocking in corners, people crying. The worst conditions. And the sadness, the smell, the feelings, you could just see people looked so sad and so lost. And there were people, adults in cribs, because they came in as babies and no one ever bothered because they had some mobility issues to teach them to walk or get them a device or even get them a chair. They were left in cribs. And, each time I went, I just felt horrible leaving everybody else behind. And then I would go and do the behavior plans. Well, I was asked to do a behavior plan for this fellow named James, right? And I have to apologize in advance because sometimes I tell the same stories. Now, this is what happens when you get old, right? You tell the same story over and over again as though no one had ever heard it before. So if you heard this story, go watch some TV or get a nice snack. But this story is so important to me because it shows you what I didn't understand and the impact of institutionalization for all of you working with folks who have been institutionalized back in the day, or people, and this is another segment of the population, who transitioning youth who were in adolescent facilities where there were a lot of restraints and seclusion used, which is just as traumatizing, very traumatizing, restraints and seclusion and, repeated invasive procedures. So institutionalization creates trauma. There was James. And my first assignment as the behavior specialist was to go and write a plan for James addressing non-compliance. He was non-compliant, right? Well, non-compliant is one of my least favorite terms, right? Who's compliant? I mean, you're pretty compliant because you're sitting in front of a computer for 3 hours. Sorry about this. And that is admirable. But most of us don't do everything you're supposed to do. I just had my dental exam and there's like, here's your gift of your toothbrush and your floss. Like, thanks for the floss, which will go in the back of my cabinet with all the other flosses they've given me. I know, I'm non-compliant. My dentist already knows that. Who's compliant? But in any case, that's what we're supposed to address. And I got in there and I was enthusiastic. Yes, sure. I'll get James right as rain. We'll just get him all straightened out. We'll just get him compliant. Why was he non-compliant? He wouldn't take a shower. He wouldn't wear clean clothes. He wouldn't shave. He looked like a pirate. And he talked like a pirate. He was great. He was like, hey, how you doing? What do you want? What do you want today? That's how he talked. And so I said, James, we're gonna write a plan and we're gonna help you to clean up, but I gotta find out what you like, right? So I did my reinforcement survey. What does he like? What does he want? And found out he likes soda. I love soda. I'll take a soda. And I said, well, how do you feel about taking a shower and wearing clean clothes to get a soda? Sure. He was always very cooperative, right? Sure. Told us yes for everything. So I write up the plan, train the staff. All right, James is going to take a shower to get a soda. Got the sodas out there, got sodas in the house. So James would go in that bathroom, taking my shower, turn on the water, turn off the water, and go get himself a soda. And the staff got mad at me. They said, this is a stupid plan. This plan doesn't work. Yeah, it's true. It didn't work. So I'm like, okay, we'll just get another reinforcer. We'll see. So I go back to James and like, okay, what else do you like? And, you know, James really want you to take a shower. It's very important for hygiene and cleanliness and want you to wear clean clothes. He would go in the dirty laundry and get his dirty clothes back on before anyone could stop him, right? Come on, James. And we're gonna clean this up. So we did that, and I said, okay, what else do you like? I like money. Oh, okay, let me go to the boss and see if we can get some money for some reinforcers. And, you know, okay, we got James, will give you a quarter. Back then, you know, wasn't anything to sneeze at. I said, James, this will add up. It's a lot of sodas you can buy and a lot of things. And, you know, at the day program in the vending machine, okay, sure, I'll take a shower for a quarter. So he did the same thing, and he's continued to outsmart the staff. He ran the program on us, and we found out he knew how to get into the med cabinet because that's where the money was. He was good. And nothing I did worked. He was still dirty, still wouldn't take a shower. Staff were mad at me. Why am I wasting my time? Why are you making me take this data? I'll just check the whole month. He's not doing any of it, XXX. But then the perfect behavior plan came along, and her name was Sarah. And Sarah had curly blonde hair and dimples. She had Down syndrome, right? Big, round, blue eyes. And James came home from the day program, and he's like, I met my wife, and I'm going to marry her. I was like, James, that's great. Are you going to start dating her? Ask her out? Nah, just going to marry her. You want to cut right to the chase, right? So I'm like, well, why don't you get to know her? Take a few weeks and get to know her. All right, just 2 weeks. So we would sit with her every day, talk to her every day, having a nice time. Then 2 weeks, he gets the staff to take him to the Kmart. Back then, right? He's got money because he got money from the med cabinet, money for not taking a shower, right? So he's got his money, gets a ring, goes to the day program, and he proposes. So told me the story. He says, I'm going to make you my wife. And he shows her the ring. And she goes like this, no way, you stink. And kind of did, as you can imagine. So guess who started taking a shower? He actually started wearing clean clothes. Wearing clean clothes, taking a shower, shaving. And, you know, we got him this electric shaver so he could do it himself. And he started wearing cologne. He wore that first, I don't know if you remember years ago, probably most of you are too young, Old Spice, in the first Old Spice, which was so smelly. You could smell him a mile away, but he smelled a lot better than he used to. And he was wearing his cologne. And I am happy to tell you that 2 years later, they ended up getting married. It was a beautiful wedding. And that's when I learned how to do couples counseling. I was like, uh-oh, I better read that book I never read in graduate school. Fight sometimes, because he was kind of sliding back. And she had a couple of issues with him. The first was, you know, I need you to take showers and you're not doing what you said you would do. And the second was, I need you to work. We said, well, are you going to work? She said, no, because I'm the lady and the lady doesn't have to work. The man works. The lady stays home. It's like, okay. So he actually got a job at McDonald's and started doing great. And then he explained to us something I never understood. What he said was, he'd been dropped off at Rosewood. His family had left him at Rosewood, the institution, at 3 years old. Can you imagine being abandoned by your family? And it was total chaos. Back then, because he was an older guy, there was no education, because there was no law that anyone had to be educated. There was just chaos. They had the older kids watching the younger kids a lot of the times. Sometimes they abused them. And every night, every single night, James is sharing this with Sarah and I. Every single night, everybody would line up. They would line them up. They would strip naked, everybody, and they would have to walk around in a line, and they would get hosed down. How humiliating. These are people with dignity. These are people who, want to be respected, and they're hosed down like cattle, dried off, given their clothes and their meds, and sent to their cottage where the beds are all lined up. And James said, I hate the way water being sprayed on me feels. Right? That was a trigger. That was trauma. Wow. And I had seen, every time I went in, I saw this big gym with a drain in the middle of it. And I was always like, why is there a drain in the middle of that gym? Well, then I found out why. And there was a lot of trauma there, but I'm here to tell you that that relationship, the love of that relationship, because they truly did love each other and they made it. They lived together for 20 years. Then sadly, she got early onset Alzheimer's, which often happens with Downs. And she got early onset Alzheimer's and she passed away. And he was there right with her till the end, helping take care of her. And we were so worried that, that it would just ruin him. But that love had healed him so much. He actually went on to be a very effective advocate. And he advocated for the closing of Rosewood. And he was on the front page next to the governor with a ribbon. I don't know why they had a ribbon. They had a little ribbon cutting when they closed it. Because he would go to the legislation every year and say, you need to close that place. And he would tell his story. So he was able to heal with that love and also that sense of purpose. And when he passed away, it was an amazing funeral. The church was packed and people told story after story because he was an incredible guy, a hero, a survivor, and, a civil rights hero, really, truly. I learned so much from him. Yeah. So through that relationship, he could overcome that trauma and he could find purpose in his life as well. That's how people heal. The big T traumas are impactful as well as the little t traumas. The smaller traumas impact us. Being discriminated against, racism is trauma. But honestly, I say big T and little t, but the reality is to the person experiencing the trauma, it's all big T, right? Even little traumas are big. Exclusion from family. Frequent foster care placement. We see that so much, right? Oh, so many things that go on, and those are all impactful. So even folks who may not have been, had abuse that we know of, there's often just so much impact from the trauma. So, isolation, loneliness, so impactful. David Petoniak says that loneliness is the biggest problem in our field. It's the cause of physical and emotional problems, right? And there's the study by Eisenberger, but there's also Lieberman, who showed that our brain is wired up for connection, that the second strongest thing that we're motivated for and constantly seeking is social connection. 80% of the time, our brains are thinking about other people and relationships. Wow. And when you're isolated and you're lonely, when you're in an institution and feeling all alone, or even when you're in a group home or setting of some kind of nature where you don't have a lot of people in your life and the people who are with you are paid to be there, it's impactful. Loneliness is a giant issue in our field. So at this point, I think what I would like to do is take questions and then we'll take a 10-minute break. So I'm going to stop sharing and then we'll talk, we'll take our break, and then we'll be back.
I have not seen any questions come through, but if anyone has any questions, now would be the time to send those through so that we can discuss those prior to the break.
Oh, so I see all these nice, sweet chats about listening and loving and coming in. And I love all the good mornings. Okay, wonderful. Well, then if it's okay, I'd like to show a video.
Okay.
And then we'll take our 10-minute break. Perfect. Because this video is very important to me. And hopefully this will work. Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, great. So how many of you have watched Love on the Spectrum? I'm going to assume a lot of you have seen that, right? It is so wonderful. I love this so much, but so many of the folks that got all kinds of support from a reality show still aren't in relationships. And relationships are what heal people. That's going to be a theme that I'm going to keep coming back to because I saw James heal through love. I've seen other people heal, and I've seen people who have stayed isolated. And on Love on the Spectrum, I found a clip of these folks who are very supported, right? They have families who put them on a reality show and give them all kinds of nice support and encourage them to date. So many families I've worked with didn't want their kids dating, right? They're really great families. But here's a clip that I found on YouTube that did not make it into the show about people talking about being bullied. And these are the folks with the most support, right? It's the first year from Australia.
Do you think it's harder for people on the spectrum to find love and companionship?
Yes. We weren't born with manners like you are. We have to learn all our social cues.
I tend to overthink things a lot.
I have trouble with reading people's emotions and body language.
Too sharp noise can harm my brain.
I do have trouble socializing, maybe making decisions.
I have social anxiety. It's like you're in a room with lots of people and you're told that one of them has a knife. And if you talk to them, they will stab you.
It's like being in a transparent box. No one can hear you, they can see you, but they can't interact with you. You can bang on the wall, but you can't get out of it. So it's very lonely being in the box your entire life because no one can get in and you can't get out. And no one can understand you.
I just want to share my life with someone very special and to show her that my disability is not an obstacle, that I'm capable of falling in love.
When I was a kid, I actually found it difficult trying to be friends with others.
I've been to 3 schools, so I always get bullied all the time.
Yeah.
Very
We are not
pushing.
seeing the video, we are only hearing it.
Take my
Oh,
hair
no.
To share the screen that has YouTube pulled up on it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, hold on. Thank you for that. It's, as we said earlier, it is always something.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to start again. Thank you for bearing with me. And I didn't look at the chat because sometimes if I look at the chat, it messes things up. So one more try. Thank you guys. Sorry about that. I have shared sound, but I'll optimize for video clip and we'll see if that works. If not, we'll just skip the videos and I'll tell you all about them. I'll act them out for you.
Do you think it's harder for people on the spectrum to find love and companionship?
Yes.
Can you? Okay.
We weren't born with manners like you are. We have to learn all our social cues.
Hold on.
I tend to overthink.
I'm going to do it one more time, you guys. Sorry about that. And thank you for bearing with me. Otherwise, we'll take our break and I will work on it.
Do you think it's harder for people on the spectrum?
Okay, can you see it and hear it? Can you hear that,
We
Danielle?
can still only hear it. We cannot see it.
It keeps pausing my screen sharing. I don't know why.
We weren't born with manners like you
Okay,
are.
you know
We have
what?
to learn all our social cues.
That's all right.
I tend to overthink things a lot.
I apologize. Let's take our break and I will figure out why it keeps going to stop share. Sorry about that, guys. You know, it's always something. Oh, thank you. You know, I see this comment. My fiance is on the spectrum and has been bullied at the job for the past 15 years. I'm so sorry. He stood up to the bully by using his words and he got fired. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. He got fired. And the question is, how can we support him? You know, I think to me, it's a cruel world, but validating people's experience and telling them that it was horrible and wrong is a giant thing. You know, oftentimes for years when people stood up to a bully, maybe they became aggressive, we talked about their aggressive behavior, or we talked about their verbal aggression if they yelled at someone, rather than seeing that it was them trying to stand up for themselves. So just validating and listening is so impactful and so supportive. And I love that Tali said, you know, can he report it to affirmative action? Yes, that's a beautiful point. Justice. But, you know, really, in terms of what we can do with people, hearing, seeing, validating, it's so impactful. He will. My hope is that he gets a better job. I'm sure he will. Hopefully one where he's appreciated and supported in the way he deserves to be. Thank you for sharing that. So maybe that's why it didn't work, so that I could see this. All right, let's take a 10-minute break. We can make it 12 minutes since it's 2 minutes of, and I'm gonna work on the video. Oh my gosh. So the person in APS, there you go. That's another way. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much. And advice onto, you know what, Scott, let me start after our break. I will start with this question about how to support those who have trauma and but still get your interview done. Scott, that's a brilliant question. It's one we all struggle with, right? How can I be empathetic but still get what I need? So I will address that when we come back. Thank you. Okay, we're back. Can you hear, Deanne? Can you hear now? I hope so. Oh, okay, your computer froze, sorry. It's always something with this technology. So I was telling Danielle that yesterday I was fooling around and with my office manager and we tried to upload the videos. And I think I really messed something up. So sorry about that. Yeah. Thank you, Diane. Oh, well, I love that. I'm going to have to make a big slide that just says, oh, well, that I can pull up at any moment when these things go wrong. Oh, well, thank you so much. And we had two really good questions. So I want to go back to that. First, Scott said, oh, Scott, such a good question. You know, he works primarily with older adults, also younger adults who have a disability, which includes the folks with IDD, and they have abuse and neglect, and that's and exploitation, and that's what the area you work in, and advice in how to quickly establish a rapport, support those who have trauma, but still get the interview done, right? Because some people have not been heard by anybody. And once you start asking, wow, you open up the floodgates. Other people shut down. Right? So I think what is very important that we do is to convey deep respect. Like, wow, I can imagine what you've been through. I can imagine that things have happened to you, that things have been hard. And just conveying deep respect without saying that you know or that you understand how it was, but that you so get it in terms of how hard it must have been. I can imagine, or it must have been so hard. And giving that empathy, you know, with and listening, and then telling them, you know, like you would anybody, okay, and now this is what I need to do. I need to do my interview, but I am so full of respect for you. I see you. And folks have been unseen and unheard for so long. And that one person who sees them gives them the gift, right? The greatest gift, the gift of being seen and the gift of being heard. So to give that gift and then structure it and say, oh, I can't believe it. And I'm so, because you're not there to give them treatment, which is a shame, but it is what it is, right? You have to get your interview done. So you structure it, but you give them empathy and respect, and people will feel so good. It makes such a difference. And then say, and I need to do this interview. So can we do you mind if I get to these questions? I really want to hear what you have to say. You know, when you haven't been listened to and you haven't been heard for predominantly your entire life, in many cases, just somebody listening is very impactful and very healing right there. And then maybe we can figure out how to refer them for therapy. And then the other question, another really good question. Oh my goodness. How to, you know, this is such there was a question from Rosalie. What good questions to ask to learn about past trauma? You know, it's interesting because I do therapy with folks. I've learned that you have to take your cues from them. Some people are not ready. Some people blocked it out and don't remember. Some people want to talk and want to share. But there's several guidelines with that. You don't want to open something up and not be there to really give the support. So if you say, you know, I have 15 minutes and I'd love to hear what you've been through in your life. And yeah, you were in the institution and a lot of people were sexually abused. Were you sexually abused? And the person starts to remember it, starts to feel it, and then you have to go. That's the worst thing you can do. You don't want to open it up if you can't give the support. It's funny, I worked with some folks that wanted to do an assessment, and they did, we worked together to do an assessment. We ended up just doing a checklist and it didn't really go anywhere. We kind of stole it from somebody, but we did tell them we stole it. But it wasn't that good, I have to admit. But what they started doing was they started training people to assess trauma with folks with IDD. And it was a disaster. Because rather than training people to just support them and be present with them, and people all thought that they should dig and find out everybody's trauma. So folks were remembering things they hadn't remembered for a long time. They were getting upset. And, you know, this state came back to them and said, you've got to stop. Your interventions are actually making people worse after, you know, and now staff are thinking they have to get everybody's trauma. So it's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance. Actually, we can assume trauma, but we don't have to know the specifics. There's two things we really have to know. Number one, what are the person's triggers? So oftentimes that's all around. I'll talk a lot about that. All around their trauma is what triggered them, number one. And number two, what are the key ingredients to helping that person to feel safe, like it's not going to happen again? So what are their triggers so that we can create an environment, that setting environment that's supportive without triggers? And what makes that person feel safe, which is really our most important question. So that's a wonderful question, Rosalie. Thank you for asking that. And, you know, and I'm going to be addressing it some more later on because we won't always know. And we don't know what we don't know. But we do need to figure out, how can this person feel safe? How can they feel like they're going to be okay? Because everybody deserves that. Thank you.
And Karyn, you talked about, those triggering settings. We just had a question come through about how do you encourage a client to go to the doctor for a routine appointment or procedure if they have past trauma that makes them fearful of someone touching them?
Oh, I know. Believe me, I've been there 100 times. I know. Well, first of all, we have to explain to the doctor. We have to be as sensitive as possible. And then there's also bribery. We call that behavior plans. Kidding. But, so with one fellow that I work with, we would set up lunch out afterwards, right? Sometimes knowing that we're going to have that connected one-to-one time was wonderful. But then we talked to the doctor and we said, can you talk with them and tell them when we get there that you're only going to touch them in a certain way, and to really explain everything. There's still people I know that I've worked with that would never get a GYN exam, right? And I have to tell you, I wish I could say, and we figured out how to do it and what to do, but instead, we just didn't do it. So sometimes we just respect their wishes, because my aunt never got a GYN exam because she didn't want anyone touching her. And, we tried that lunch afterwards. We tried talking with the doctor, and this person just said, no, I will never do that. I will never do that. And we just had to back off. So if we can, you set up a very supportive, cozy way with that nice lunch afterwards and have the doctor address it with them. And, I wish I had the miracle answer, but sometimes we've backed off. We always have this balance between safety and health and the dignity of risk, right? And that is always our challenge, because we have adults, they're not children, right? So, I've been in situations where everybody at the table has said, okay, the doctor says a 1,200 calorie diet is important because they have to lose weight. And they're just pounding that diet onto somebody. But half the people there have been told the same thing by their doctors and aren't doing it. And, half my relatives, right? Everybody in my family had diabetes. We had all kinds of issues related to weight, and people were non-compliant, but no one listened, no one pounded them for it. They just said, oh, God, that's Uncle Harry. He won't do what the doctor says. And that's Aunt Sue, and she won't stop smoking. And yet, we feel like we can take charge of people's lives. There's a balance. There's always a balance. We're all looking at how can we really support people, but also how can they have their autonomy and dignity as well. So thank you. Another great question. We should just do questions. Just forget the slide. The slideshow's not going that well. So let's just keep going here. Okay, so now I'm going to try again. And because I was messing around in the office trying to upload the videos, I think that's what happened. So bear with me. I'm going to try one more time. And of course, now I can't see it again. Okay. Okay, now I don't know why it's not coming. All right, we're gonna share, and I'm going to go like this. Bear with me. I appreciate it, because I think because I uploaded videos, I have to stop and start again. Sorry about this awkwardness, but you are so kind to bear with me and be so nice. Okay, because you can tell I'm determined to show this. All right, here we go.
On the spectrum to find love and
Let's
companionship.
start it over.
Do you think it's harder for people on the spectrum to find love and companionship?
Yes. We weren't born with manners like you are. We have to learn all our social cues.
I tend to overthink things a lot.
I have trouble with reading people's emotions and body language.
Too sharp noise can harm my brain.
I do have trouble socializing, maybe making decisions.
I have social anxiety. It's like you're in a room with lots of people and you're told that one of them has a knife. And if you talk to them, they will stab you.
It's like being in a transparent box. No one can hear you, they can see you, but they can't interact with you. You can bang on the wall, but you can't get out of it, so it's very lonely being in the box your entire life. Because no one can get in and you can't get out. And no one can understand you.
I just want to share my life with someone very special and to show her that my disability is not an obstacle, that I'm capable of falling in love.
When I was a kid, I actually found it difficult trying to be friends with others.
I've been to 3 schools, so I always get bullied all the time.
There'd be pushing, there'd be name calling, there'd be people trying to take my hearing aid.
They figured that I was disabled, so it's easier to pick on me, I guess. Pick on the weak.
Well, I would just say in high school, it was more like I was just treated like dirt. There were these few girls who, they said I should ask this person out. I didn't realize it was a complete setup just so they could just reject me, just as a way of mocking me, really.
Didn't tell my mum that I got bullied because I always get these bruises on myself and that. Yeah.
I just wanted to get out of school, you know, I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to get therapy because it was really dark times then.
Does it still affect you?
Yes. Oh yeah, the scars don't go away. The negative thoughts.
I think, being bullied have made me who I am. And if I wasn't bullied, I would have been someone completely different.
My autism, I feel it's what's given me my creativity.
It is harder having a disability and going through life with a disability, and you got to keep moving on with life. Like a phoenix, rise up again.
Because I've got a disability, I'm on the spectrum, people are always going to look at me as different from them, and I know I'm different from them, and that's fine, so if we're all the same, the world would be pretty boring.
All right. I just love that so much. But how about that person who says, how about the person that says, it's like being in a room and somebody has a knife and you don't know who it is. I am going to have to stop and start every time. Thank you for being so patient with me. You people are so nice. So that's a reality. And think of it. How many of you have heard stories of being bullied? How many of you know people who've been bullied? How many people here, has someone told you about what happened to them in school, what happened to them? Bullying has gone on everywhere. Basically, everybody with an intellectual disability has been called the R word at some point in their life. And it's just not okay. It's not acceptable, and it's trauma. And that's very, very impactful, very, very impactful. So you can see, even in these folks who get a lot of support, the deep impact of that bullying. And it's quite a reality. I worked with one fellow who he was told by his teacher and parents that he would never have a wife and he would never have kids. And he was devastated, and he was a teenager, and he was devastated. He had an intellectual disability, and that was all he had ever wanted, was to have a wife and kids. So he did something very smart. He created an imaginary wife and an imaginary kids, right? And I met him decades later. Decades later, he was referred to me for grief counseling because somebody I supervised was doing the grief counseling with the death of his father. And she said, he's really stuck and we can't get past, this certain point. And I do EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I've done it for 20 years with folks. And she asked me to do EMDR with him. She's since been trained and she's doing it now. So when I met him, he was so devastated by what his father had done. And let me tell you about the whole thing. So he created that imaginary wife and kids, and he brought them to school every day so he could have a family because he was hurt. Of course, it's devastating and it's trauma to be told what you're not going to have and how you're going to be excluded from the whole world. And his teacher became very angry. He'd been in the same group with the same group of kids. They were in the special ed class that traveled together in the regular school right up the road from me, Towson. And he had been with those same people all along, and they were his friends, right? They had close relationships. And the teacher was so outraged that he was now moved to the back because he said he had to have 3 seats next to him so he could sit with his wife and his kids. And he would say to the kids, sit back down, you got to listen, it's important. And he said, I would talk to the kids. And the teacher got mad. The teacher made fun of him. The teacher really bullied him. And the other kids turned on him and started laughing at him. And then she went to the principal and said, this kid should be in the special school. He's not smart enough for this school. And they brought the parents in, and he was very smart. Bob was a very, very smart guy and understood everything and just tried to figure out his workaround. And his dad went along with the teacher. And in his sophomore year, they transferred him over to the school where the kids were very, very involved, very medically involved, where there was very little education going on, where most of the kids were not speaking. And back then there was not a lot of assistive technology, so people were basically being warehoused. And he had to spend the rest of his high school years there. And that's what he was in his 50s, couldn't get past. So we did the EMDR, we did this intensive trauma work. And, you know, it started to open him up. And he said, well, he started to see the good things. And he was amazing. He had gotten himself a job, you know, back when very few people were getting jobs. He got a job at the Giant and had worked there for 20 years. And first he was in an ALU, alternative living unit setting, but then he was able to get his own place and with drop-in supports from staff because he had a lot of skills. And he started having parties for all those people that he used to be friends with, that he had stayed connected to. He became known for his parties. So as we're doing the EMDR, he's like realizing, yeah, my life has been good. And yeah, I guess my father just didn't get it because I guess he listened to the teacher and not me. And he wrote this letter to his father, which was so beautiful. Like, you were wrong about me. I'm smart. And I knew what was going on. He still didn't really see how horrible it was that people said you would never have a wife and kids. But, you know, he could put together that his father took sides with the bully because the bully was so strong and his father didn't get it. And then he wrote these 2 beautiful letters to his brothers, explaining why he had always been so upset and what really went on. But let me tell you something, coincidentally, my mother and his father were in the same assisted living for a period until my mother was kicked out. That's another story, a little bit of trauma here, but they were in the same assisted living. And he was the only one who was visiting because I would see him go and visit. So he still stood by his dad. And when he processed all this, you know, he was able to really move forward. But that bullying haunted him and affected him. And I have hundreds of stories like this. I bet you guys do too. The impact of bullying. Like that girl says, someone has a knife. Every group that she's in, she knows there's someone with a knife here. Because someone's going to say that mean thing, right? So Bruce Perry says, what happened to you, right? That the most important question is what happened to you? What happened to you? And the difference with us is that we won't always know. We won't always know what happened to people. I'm going to show you a little bit later when we go on break. We'll come back and I'll show you this video of Mel Baggs. May they rest in peace. A wonderful, wonderful civil rights advocate for disability rights who everybody thought was non-speaking. They were non-speaking, but everybody thought was profoundly involved and was a brilliant, brilliant person. And, you know, they said being treated like an unperson is the most devastating thing. And one thing they say, non-binary. They passed away recently, but they were non-binary recently. And they say the most devastating thing is not rage, it's not people's anger, it's erasure or being erased, not seen, not heard. That's the most devastating thing. Being an unperson, they called it. So I pretty much believe that we can assume trauma. As I said, I worked on this assessment tool. It wasn't that effective. I worked on another more elaborate assessment tool. We had trouble validating, doing the validation and reliability, because honestly, I mean, it's important that we do come up with better assessment tools, because the trauma assessment tools, the DID assessment tools of disassociation often don't translate in the disability world because symptoms manifest differently. But I believe we can assume trauma. I really do. And I believe it's important for us to recognize and to understand that then how do we support people in healing? And there's a difference between fixing and healing, right? For years, we thought our job was fixing.
All right, are you able to share now, Karyn?
I'm going to show the video. I'm going to take this opportunity to try to show the video that I wanted to show about Mel Baggs. So Mel Baggs is such an important voice in our field, and it was so tragic that they died. They had a very important blog, and so they talk in this video. Mel talks about their experience of being in an institution, then being in a group home, then being in an apartment, but hearing people talk, how many people have, you know, had that experience where we know people are talking about someone right in front of them. We're like, stop, don't do that. And hearing people talk about them and seeing things going on. And then they talk about the history of disabilities, how people were in circuses and, you know, used for research and in institutions. So it's a riveting talk. And it was very impactful because no one realized how brilliant and how observant Mel was. And what Mel talks about is the experience of being an unperson, right? And how devastating that is. So hopefully this will work. I know, Danielle, you'll tell me. Now, why? Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. I'm going to share, but then I'm going to have to mess around a little. Bear with me.
This is from a handout I gave while speaking at a training for staff.
You can't see it or hear it, right? Okay.
No, we cannot.
Okay, we'll start it because it turns yellow on me and says it just stops. It just automatically stops sharing. But we will overcome this.
For people with developmental.
Can you hear and see that?
This is from a handout I gave while speaking at a training for staff who work for people with developmental disabilities. It is about what it means to be dehumanized, and it applies to a far broader group of people than the original audience. It is to make this clear about something that is done to us by other people, not something intrinsic to who we are. Being an unperson means that people talk in front of you as if you aren't there. If they know you understand them, it means you're not enough of a person for it to matter. It means listening to staff gossip, saying things they would not dare say in front of real people. It means hearing their bluntest viewpoints about you out loud to your face with the person behind that face unacknowledged. It means hearing confidential information about other unpersons. Being an unperson means that your life is not a real life. It means being treated worse than most people would treat their own pet gerbil, and with less guilt. It means that your existence seems to fill people with disgust and fear. People see and describe you as a hollow shell, a body without a soul, a shambling child, or a vegetable. Or else they romanticize your life, calling you a special angel on earth. Whatever they call you, people refuse to see that you exist at all. Being an unperson means being considered non-communicative. If you somehow, once in a blue moon, manage to communicate in speech, those words will be seen in pathological terms rather than communicative ones. If you communicate in writing, people will question your authorship. If you communicate with behavior, you will be punished, restrained, drugged, or put on a behavior program. No matter how clever and intricate a communication system you devise, you will be described as incapable of true communication. Being an unperson means having all the true communication drummed out of you. It means having your behavior and words, if you have them, molded to fit what other people want or expect of you. It means having this molding placed on you like a straitjacket. It means screaming and screaming inside your head that you are a real person, but nothing gets out. On the rare occasion that something does get out, an action that is from your desires rather than your training, an oral or written statement that you really are a real person and feel trapped, you will be punished, ridiculed, or ignored. Being an unperson means being treated like a child, which should really make people think about how they view children, or at best like a beloved pet. It means that if you do something real, important, and meaningful to you, people will think it's cute. They have a special laugh reserved for that. It means being spoken to in a voice people normally use on children. Being an unperson means being brutalized. An unperson can't tell about beatings, rape, torture, and murder. If she does, she will not be believed. An unperson knows that the law will never come to his aid, not the way it does for real people. If he dies, here, today, at the hands of another, it will not be considered murder. Being an unperson means being expendable and interchangeable with all the other unpersons of the world. An unperson means living up to low expectations. It means being punished or shamed for showing emotion, awareness of your environment, or originality of thought. It means that once you no longer show these things outwardly, except maybe to a few other unpersons who know what you're doing, people take one look at your most superficial appearance and declare you even more of an unperson. Being an unperson means being hated. Not always in an overt emotional way. It means people want you to be a real person. Which sounds good until you realize they don't believe you are a person already. They want to shape you into someone else, or else use you like a blank projector screen for their fantasies. Sometimes they tell you they want to reel you back, as if you're not there. Being an unperson means that your existence as who you are is denied at the deepest level by those around you. And that, being erased, is the true nature of hate. Rage is nothing in comparison to erasure. Being an unperson means that if you must hurl your abilities, everything you have learned over the years, and attempt to advocate for yourself in any possible way you know how, you will be labeled manipulative, attention-seeking, or a bad or difficult client. You learn that people like to work with the good clients. The ones who have been so twisted by being treated as unpersons that they are completely passive and compliant. You realize from memory of being like that no person on the planet should ever be twisted that far. But when you tried to stand up for yourself, to break out of terrified submission, then you are labeled aggressive and hostile and treated accordingly. Being an unperson means that you are not allowed to want what anyone else would want in your situation. Being an unperson means being at the mercy of the theories other people have about you. It means having communication given to you one day, maybe the first day in your life, and then taken away the next when this is considered a fad or a hoax or just too bothersome to the staff's routine. It means being thrown in big nasty institutions when that is considered protective, then broken away from your friends and sent to littler but just as nasty institutions when that is considered progressive, and then isolated from everyone in your own apartment when that is considered radical, no matter what your desires ever were in the whole matter. It means being tortured and killed as a demonic changeling, displayed as a circus freak, used medically as a lab animal, and tortured and killed in the name of treatment or medicine or protection, with the changing of time and culture. Staff people always say they are not like this. Last time I told a staff person about how other staff abused me, she laughed and told me the other staff at that place didn't abuse people. Within hours, I watched her and other staff laugh while they made another inmate beg like a dog for a glass of water and a change of socks. People need to show they are not like this, not say it, if we are to believe them. I have been a non-person. Now I'm sometimes a non-person and sometimes a real person, depending on who is around me. The difference between a non-person and a real person is not a difference of what is called degree or kind of impairment or disability. There is no line you can draw and correctly say that on this side of the line lay the real people, and on the other side you only have the unpersons. There is no such thing as a true unperson. An unperson is a ghost, a prejudice in people's minds. Those of us considered unpersons by others are aware of this prejudice when it is planted in us. In the end, there are only real people, and the ghost of the unperson is projected on top of some of us.
So powerful, right? Mel was such an important voice, and no one should ever have to feel like an unperson. That's why what each one of you does every day is so impactful, because you're the people listening and seeing and validating, and that's what we have to do. That's our greatest gift that we give, is saying you are a person, right? I'm just so appreciative that Mel made the videos. There are a number of videos Mel made and had their blog and shared what they shared. Here we go. So we're not quite sure what's going on with the internet or with the Zoom, because sometimes the Zoom doesn't let me show things. So hopefully this is here and you can see the slide, but we are being flexible, and you are a wonderful group of people because you came back. Thank you so much. So trauma is not what happens to you, says Gabor Mate. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you, right? Important distinction. He is a brilliant speaker, writer, and psychiatrist who was a Holocaust survivor as a tiny child. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be seen as on a continuum. I believe this strongly. You know, for years, as we said earlier, it was just vets. Then we're looking for people with severe trauma. Now we're realizing anyone can have different degrees of PTSD and ways in which they're triggered. One thing I see frequently in many of the people that I've supported through the years is what's called betrayal trauma. And betrayal trauma is, you know, the devastation of realizing that somebody betrayed you. I think most humans have had the experience of being betrayed by someone or something, right? Where somebody lied or somebody pretended they were one thing and they were another. My girlfriend's going through this right now in her current breakup. And now we're all like taking turns being with her. you know, making sure that she's all right because she was so gaslit and so betrayed, kind of like that Tinder swindler. But oftentimes I found when I was doing crisis counseling based on incidents of sexual abuse, that betrayal was the most devastating thing. So that's something I'm often called in to do. I hate to say often. It seems often to me, but a couple times a year, I'll be called for, you know, crisis counseling due to a sexual assault. And I want to be focused on prevention. That is my goal, right? But I've done so many years of crisis counseling. And through the years, the assault is devastating, but in all situations except one, the people that I've worked with knew the perpetrator and were told that they were going to marry them, or they were their boyfriend, or that was an important relationship to them, one after another. And here is Tamika, and Tamika asked me to tell her story. Her story is that all she ever wanted and talked about was having a boyfriend. And she did have this guy at the day program that she was kind of seeing, except when we tried to support her in having a date with him, the mother shut it down. Like, my son is not dating and we are not doing that, right? But at her person-centered meeting every year, we would have our goals. But did we listen to her real goal, which she kept telling us, I want a boyfriend. My goal is to have a boyfriend. No, she got a cooking goal, and she got a making her bed goal, and she got a whatever goal, because she would just go along with us since it was easier, and we weren't listening. And what happened was she did get some alone time, and she started walking every day. And this man saw her and started giving her rides. And then he gave her a ride to the dollar store. This is a little bit of a bad story, but it turns out good. He gave her a ride to the dollar store. He started giving her $1 for the dollar store, which is now $1.25, but it was still $1 back then. It was only a few years ago. And then he told her he would be her boyfriend, first of all. And she was very excited. She came home and told everybody at home that she had a boyfriend, and nobody asked. They were just happy for her. And then he brutally sexually assaulted her. Thank God she got back home. Thank God she was okay. And then, of course, I'm brought in. I actually had left the agency then, but I had known her, and she was brought to me for crisis counseling. And the most devastating thing was that she thought he was going to marry her, and that was her boyfriend. It was all devastating. They arrested him, thank goodness, you know, she was okay, and they got her, you know, the sane, you know, she got the assessment, the sexual assault assessment. They did everything right, and he was arrested, but she was devastated. So again, we did the trauma work, the EMDR, and then we worked on building a positive sense of self and helping her to be able to really own and feel like she deserves what she wanted. And, you know, at the time during that time when that happened, I was in that agency running a singles group. I always run singles groups. Right now I'm working with people on a dating app, you know, trying to support love and relationships, because that's what heals people. And her staff would say, well, my ladies don't want to go. And even though I knew that she wanted a boyfriend, I didn't pursue that. That was my mistake, and it was horrible, because she lived with 2 older women who never wanted to do much of anything. But after we did all that therapy and all that work, Tamika spoke up for herself. First, she said to me, I'm done now, because she didn't want to keep coming. We worked for about 9 months. And then she said, I'm going to my agency and telling them I want to live with young people and I want to do fun things. And the singles group was still going on. She said, and I want to go on the cruises, because we used to have cruises. Well, we only went in a circle around the Baltimore Harbor. I wish I could tell you we went to Puerto Rico, and everybody was home in time for meds, but everybody got at least one drink, and people met, and then we followed up with dating. I said, I want to go on the cruises. And she advocated for herself, and she got moved, and she actually started having a wonderful social life because she was with these 2 other young, you know, excited women, and they were doing stuff. And then COVID happened. But, you know, I know they're back up and swinging. I know they are. because, you know, she needed that support. And what was the initial response of the agency? We better take away that alone time. No, that was not the direction to go in, right? So we had to fight for her, and then she was able to fight for herself. And her life is a lot better now, but that betrayal is devastating. So I'm going to stop again for questions. Let's see. Sorry about that. I'm trying to stop sharing. Oh goodness, are we gone again?
No, you are good.
Okay.
We're not sharing anymore.
Okay, good. I was just worried because, okay, now I'm not sharing. Okay, great.
I know every time it skips, I'm like, oh no, don't.
Oh no, exactly it. And now I can't get back, but at least I'm here. Okay, good.
We did have a question come through that I noted prior to us all getting kicked out from Antonio. And that was if you had any advice on explaining death to someone who has an intellectual disability without creating more trauma.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. That's a great question. And I've seen it done many different ways. And I've done it many different ways. And I'll tell you, my experience, the most effective way is in groups. I really swear by doing group therapy, but it doesn't have to be therapy, but grief groups, support groups with other folks with disabilities, where they can hear from other people and they can share losses and they can talk about life and talk about it with each other. That has been just amazingly powerful for me. And wherever I work and wherever I can, I try to do group work. And you don't have to be a therapist to do it. Having a support group can be very effective of folks who have lost someone, and maybe folks who just want to support people who have lost someone. Or, you know, I think people are smarter than we realize. Sometimes they're smarter than us. And IQ has very little to do with intelligence. You know, people know. People know. And they can encourage each other and share their experiences. It's like, you know, for Philip was the one comforting his staff. He got it. He knew how hard it was for her, let alone him. So yeah, the groups. And there was another comment there as well. What was that? Let's see. I hope that's helpful. Also, just, you know, talking person to person, heart to heart. It is a sad thing about planet Earth. People die. Jim Morrison said from The Doors, right? He said, no one gets out alive. So we should talk about it. And there was another comment, I think. Danielle, did you see it?
We just had another question come through. Just the difficulty in finding professionals to work with, you know, our individuals, and, you know, how do we find those services that are appropriate?
I have some good news. My book is coming out, I'm hoping in a few weeks, Trauma and Healing. It's written for therapists. It has a lot of materials for therapists. It's written for two groups, like anyone can use the materials. I have a bunch of social stories. I have stories about death. I have stories about bullying. I have stories, they're like short stories, very short, that you can read with somebody that you're giving supports to, about people who have lost people or people who have been bullied or whatever. And there's discussion questions. And it's all designed to give material for therapists as well as anyone who's working with folks. So I'm not promoting my book, even though it sounds like I am. I guess I kind of just did. But I got so frustrated. I got so frustrated that we couldn't find therapists. So I'm like, I'm writing a damn book. And I think, but also, you know, so that's a resource. I have a lot of workbooks on my website that are all free and that are designed for therapists to be able to use, or anybody. There's my Goodbye book, which is a grief book. I've used it now, and lots of people I know have used it for about 20 years. We've been using it to process loss, and it really helps that person. It's KarynHarvey.org, Karyn Harvey.org. And, you know, it's all free because we've got to, you know, we've got to be concrete, and it helps. We don't, we don't have to be concrete, but it's very helpful to have tools. So I tried to develop as many tools as I could for therapeutic interventions on all levels. But I think really in answer, thank you, Anna, in answer to your question, more fundamentally, like we have to be the bridge, right? Like so many people I know, they had to go find a therapist and talk the therapist into it and come and bring the person to the session. And then what I do as a therapist is I ask the staff to come in for the very end of the session so they can feel part of the treatment team and not disclose everything that was said, but bring them in and say, we had a wonderful session and this is what Joe's going to work on. Joe, do you want to share that with your staff so that the staff feels a part of it and that we have this bridge? So I think for us on our side of it is to build those bridges with the mental health folks, with the therapists, and tell them we'll be involved all the way. We're there and we're giving the support, and build those bridges wherever we can. And it's a great question. Thanks. So at this point, is it okay since we lost 1 minute to go till 10 after?
Yes, and can you just provide the name again of your new book coming out? Because we've had some people ask.
Thank you. Trauma and Healing. And AAIDD, my wonderful friends who are so good to me are publishing it. Thanks. And it's so funny because I realized I had, you have these aha moments, and we'll still come back at 10 after, but my aha moment was stop writing about them and start writing for them. So it's been going well. Thank you.
Okay, we will come back then at 10 after.
All right, back on track. We're here. Yay. You just learn to appreciate the basic things, right? That we got back on. I'm so happy. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about also the trauma of neglect, because I bet many of you work with people who were born into chaotic situations. Maybe there was alcohol abuse or drug abuse, all kinds of things, where there may have been neglect. And neglect can be very devastating. And there was a very important study done now about 12 years ago. And Nathan Fox did it out of University of Maryland, but he was able to get several hospitals involved and get a lot of funding and go to Romania, where there was a very poor orphanage, very few staff. Somebody has raised their hand. Is everything okay? Okay. Very few staff. Maybe, I hope everybody can hear and see the screen. But in any case, there were few staff, and it was a real situation where there were infants all the way up the line, and they took the infants to the 5. So from 0 to 5, they took half the kids, just randomly selected half the kids, and put them in a very nurturing foster care system. So some of these kids, the kids were from 6 months old to 4.5. And some of these kids were already like so much neglect, 4.5 years of neglect and whatever. But they designed this system that really nurtured them in foster care, where at least one parent had to stay home. And here's the results. Those kids left in the institution, in the orphanage, 55% had some real severe mental health issue, access 1 disorder, thought or mood disorder, versus down 20%, down by 20 to 35%. Oh my gosh, less the kids, 35% versus 55% with a severe mood or thought disorder. The biological are just children control group raised in their own homes. Emotional disorders, 49% to 29%. Behavioral disorders were less because a lot of people were really shut down.
Karyn, we're seeing leadership skills instead of.
Gosh. Isn't that crazy? And I keep trying to pull up the slide, and it's here we go. Let's see if this works. Thank you for that. That's my other talk. I do trauma-informed leadership. because what I realized, I'll give a little, do you see now the results? Okay, good. So that's so crazy because I'm having, there's some kind of Zoom issue going on. Because I kept clicking on this, and I don't even have the leadership one up. It just pulled it up from it's not even on my screen at all. So, but I do trauma-informed leadership because once I realized that, you know, if we're asking so much of the DSPs to be trauma-informed, that we should train the frontline managers in trauma-informed leadership. So I do that too. But that was not this talk, and I'm so sorry. Thank you, Danielle. So, but the results, here you see the results that I was telling you about, 32% to 25%. And most important for us, the average IQ of those who had been left at the orphanage was 73 versus a 12-point increase when they got the nurturing and support, 85. You know, people who have been neglected intensely need nurturing and support. And the children who stayed in the institution, actually, there were a number of premature deaths. Their brains were physically shrunk. The gray matter of their brain was smaller than the children that were taken out. There were all kinds of differences. Actually, trauma and neglect, both, you know, it's all one, changes your brain. And it impairs cognitive functioning. People need that interaction. We have a function called our mirror neurons. We don't know if there's actual neurons or it's just a neuronal function. But when you're a little baby and you look at somebody smiling at you, your brain is wiring and firing as though it's smiling. When you hear language, your brain is wiring and firing as though it's talking, even though you're just kind of blobbing out because you're only 2 or 3 months or weeks. And we need that interaction. And many of us work with people who didn't get it, didn't get that interaction, didn't get that support. And so there are holes there, but the intelligence is still there, right? How many of you know somebody who's really, really smart with an intellectual disability? Now you're thinking of that person, I'll ask you, did they have a trauma history? Because that trauma impacts the brain's ability to talk to itself. We know that now a big piece of intelligence is not just, you know, some seed that grows and we all have different seeds. No, it's how well your brain can talk to itself. It's how well the brain creates neural networks and highways. And a lot of that is based on the interaction and stimulation that you got during critical developmental periods. And when that developmental period, you didn't get that stimulation, when that developmental period was, you know, halted in some way because the environment wasn't supporting you, then that affects every aspect, including cognition. And that's what that study shows us. So thinking about that person who's really smart, that has that intellectual disability that you're thinking of, do they have a trauma history? I can tell so many stories, right? We all know people. Yeah, but that trauma really shut that brain down. The other thing, very traumatic, is those exposures in utero, as well as sometimes there's undetected head injuries, but the in utero exposure of drugs and alcohol. About 20 years ago now, maybe 20 years ago, I started realizing that there was a whole nother profile of person coming into our agency. And then I was connecting with other people and they were seeing the same thing. There were folks who were smart, had good expressive language, but had two real difficulties. One, terrible impulse control, like jumping out of cars, running into traffic, and severe ADHD, like really having a hard time to focus and all over the place, but smart and good expressive skills, but not always getting everything. And what we started to see in the history, many of them had been born addicted to cocaine during the crack cocaine epidemic that happened in many cities. And we started to see the records and find the records of, yeah, they were addicted to cocaine, born that way. And there was a study done saying that there wasn't long-term effects of it, but that study didn't follow them into school. It was just for 2.5 years. Now we know that the effects of cocaine in utero are really devastating. And many of these folks who are probably now in their 30s and early 40s, have brain damage as a result. And then what often happen is this dual exposure of drug and alcohol. And the alcohol impairs your ability to connect cause and effect when you're exposed in utero, right? There's a problem with sequential learning. So if I tell you A equals B and B equals C, you're going to know, oh, A equals C. But people with fetal alcohol syndrome have trouble connecting that. So they can't understand often the relations in a behavior plan. If you do X, you're going to get Y, because that's sequential reasoning. And sometimes there's both drug and alcohol. Sometimes there's undetected head injuries. So often we're dealing with organic damage that we may not hear about, we may not know about. Sometimes we don't have those records. Sometimes we don't get the information. Only 10% of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder folks actually have the facial features. Oftentimes there's all kinds of damage and we might not see it as a facial feature. All kinds of things that we are dealing with. And I remember those first years when we had just many people coming into our program who had such impulse control disorders, but smart, good language skills, but processing difficulties. But at first they were so misunderstood, so many of them, because they had the language skills. People would say, oh, they're just being manipulative. They know exactly what they're doing. Well, because they can talk a good game. But then those gaps in the brain were from, as we started to unearth, were from this exposure. So there was biological damage. I've worked with several people who were born into such neglectful and difficult abusive situations that they ended up being prostituted out by mothers who were very desperate. And it was the drug controlling the person, not the person. Right? So we have, because of that raging epidemic, we have folks in their 30s and 40s now who have that history. And we may be seeing that. It's all levels of trauma, right? And often the biological damage doesn't show. And people, like I'm working with one fellow now where I know that he had a head injury in infancy, but I just kept saying I'm so sure there's a traumatic brain injury, because he could be so smart and he, has some good skills, but then there are big gaps. And, I just kept saying this, but everyone kept saying, no, he's just manipulative and he's just getting over, right? Oh, but no, finally mom said to me that she remembers a time when he was unconscious with the fall. I was able to finally spend some time with mom and ask her, was there, often we never know, but the damage is organic, right? Physical. So we have the damage from the trauma, damage from neglect, and sometimes damage from that in utero exposure. So let's talk about the biological damage from the trauma and just the trauma responses that we see, right? So our brain is wired up, and many of you have heard this before, right? So you can take a nap, but it's important that we kind of understand the functions of the brain. So we have, brain doesn't look like this, but it's a good way to understand kind of the three sections of the brain, right? We have the part that just keeps the body going, that brainstem. We have our limbic section, which, is that's where our fight, flight, or freeze system is. That's where the amygdala or the emotional memory is. But that's also where the parasympathetic, so that's sympathetic, the parasympathetic system, which is the calm down. So you have the fight, flight, or freeze, and when people respond to trauma and protect themselves. And then we have the calm down system, all in the yellow part, all in the limbic. And then we have our smart brain, our neocortex. And that's our rational thinking and our planning and our analyzing. This worked really great when we were cavemen, right? So let's imagine that we're out in the field and we're hanging around and we're having a good time, and we caught an antelope and we're having an antelope roast and kids are running around. It's great. We figured out how to use fire. Yay. Life is good. And then all of a sudden a furry thing comes and we're like, what's that furry thing? And the furry thing eats Susie. Oh no, we grab the other kids and we leave. Somebody get that antelope. We don't want them to eat that. And so what happens in our yellow part of the brain, the limbic system, there's the amygdala, which takes a picture of that. And we, it immediately, the minute there's danger, it floods the brain with chemicals so we can fight or run or do whatever we have to do. So we get that extra strength, cortisol and adrenaline, boom. And, it takes a picture so we remember. And when that yellow part of the brain is sending out danger signals because there's a dangerous situation, the smart brain goes offline. The smart brain shuts down just so you can respond, right? You're not sitting around analyzing it or making a plan for tomorrow, what you're going to eat for breakfast. No, you got to just fight. So let's say a couple of weeks later, you caught a boar. We caught a boar. We're out there. We're having a good time roasting the boar. We miss Susie. She was a cutie. And then we see another furry thing. Now that in our yellow part of the brain, that amygdala, which takes the pictures and sends danger signals, it's called the implicit memory. Like, oh my God, there it is again. Now we have a name for it. It's a lion. Oh my gosh, there's the lion. Some of us get the kids and run. Others of us get some stones and sticks and try and kill the lion. We respond. And that's how we stayed alive. That's how we survived, right? That's how the species kept going. Our brain was really good at that. And our smart brain goes offline because it's not time to sit around and think, is that the same lion? I don't know about those stripes. Are they the same? You think, oh, maybe it's a relative. Wait a minute, this one didn't have that. No, it's a damn lion. Let's get out of here. So that works really well for protecting us. But now we work with folks who have a lot of trauma and sometimes see lions, and they start running or fighting or freezing or fawning, right? All kinds of trauma responses, and their smart brain is offline. I wrote some really bad behavior plans. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'll tell you, I wrote a plan that said, tell them they're going to lose their soda if they hit somebody, but they're thinking the only way I can survive is hit them before they kill me because their amygdala is firing. And, I remember this guy I work with, his name was Dan, and he was out of the institution, dropped off as a kid again, no family. Families were told the best thing you can do for them is forget you ever had them. So he was there, and he came to our day program. We had a program for folks who were dually diagnosed, and every couple of weeks he would just go completely ballistic. He would start throwing chairs and screaming and flipping tables, but he was fine otherwise. So I did my functional assessment. I was writing the behavior plans and we said, oh, it's not for attention, because he was flooded with attention. We loved him and talked to him all the time. He could talk, but when he was in that state, he wouldn't be able to talk. So he was usually communicating, but he stopped communicating. We couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure out, was he trying to escape a demand? We weren't demanding anything. And then finally we figured it out. It was every time the program manager walked into the room, and she had straight blonde hair and she was tall, and she didn't know him, but he was sure that she was someone. And every time he saw her, he started screaming and throwing things and trying to protect himself. And we just looked at it as aggression and property destruction. I wrote a plan which told the staff to say, don't throw that chair, because if you throw your chair, you're going to lose your soda, because every day we get a soda for not screaming or throwing things or attacking anyone. It had nothing to do with it. He was triggered. His yellow part of his brain, his amygdala, was saying, danger, 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 because somebody who looked just like her had done something horrible to him. And I've seen this so many times where a certain person looks like someone and is a trigger. So we had to just set things up where he would never see her. She talked to him. We had an old building in the front. That was my cat knocking things off my shelf, which is one of his favorite things to do. I apologize. Of course, that's what the day is going like. Probably broke something. I'm not looking. But in any case, back to Dan, and we had this plan that said, he's going to lose his soda if he's doing that. Well, his smart brain was offline. He didn't care about a soda. Anyone telling him he's going to lose his soda, he just got more upset. What do you mean? I need my soda. Ah! And he'd have this glassy-eyed look. And what I finally came to realize, it's like a flashback. I'd worked with this other fellow. I used to be kind of in a clinic, but within an agency. We had the psychiatrist and myself, and people were brought to us. And this one guy had been hospitalized for many years, and we knew he was abused in that hospital because actually a paper was written about it, and it became, his name actually stood for people who were wrongly hospitalized, even though they had an intellectual disability, in psychiatric units and abused by fellow patients. And this man walked in when this guy, we'll call him Bill, when Bill was waiting to be seen, this man walked in and Bill flipped out. He's trying to kill me, he said. And he went, he's screaming, don't kill me, don't kill me. And then he went and was shaking in the corner. We couldn't calm him down. We got the guy out of there. For 20 minutes, he was shaking. And he wasn't himself for another couple of months. And he would never come back to that clinic. Because that guy, he did not know that guy, but that guy looked like someone who had done something to him. Right? How many times do we see these kind of triggers? And we try to rationalize with people. All we can do is help them to feel safe and figure out as much as we can what safety means to that person and how we can be supportive in every way possible. Because we see trauma responses, that fight, flight, or freeze response. Lately, people have been talking about fawning, and I've seen that too, where I'll become your best friend and anything you need and anything, I love you, you're my mommy, I'll call you mommy, just to get them not to abuse them, right? And attachment issues come up. People become very needy. They can become very clingy. I need you, I need you, I need you, or withdrawn. Or how about shame? I'm a bad person. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When there's a bad thing that happens, or they have an episode, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The shame just overtakes them when it wasn't rational. The amygdala actually becomes enlarged when people have had a lot of trauma. And what happens is that the hippocampus, or the working memory, shrinks. Interestingly enough, I saw Temple Grandin speak, and she showed a video of her brain. She said, this is what a brain with somebody with autism looks like. I have an enlarged amygdala and a shrunken hippocampus. Well, that's the same as studies that were done of children who grew up in war-torn Bosnia and children who grew up in gangs and in, with lots of violence. Their amygdalas have had so many pictures of trauma that they become enlarged, and it makes it harder to learn because the hippocampus, which shrinks, is the working memory. So people have a harder time learning. We see trauma responses, right? So often what I thought was behavioral, I found out later that person was just freaking out. Sometimes people have a glassy-eyed look, and you know what? That can be a flashback, right? They're not even present. I bet you've all seen it. So we might be judging something as being behavioral or deliberate with intention when it's really trauma-based. So this one woman that I work with, her name was Judy, and she came to us as she was labeled a fire setter. These labels are so horrible. And it was well, here's the story. She was growing up in rural Maryland. And, I believe that she had fetal alcohol syndrome, but there was no diagnosis, but I really believe that. But she was neglected, and her brother began sexually abusing her, and it went on for a while. And then he brought his friends. This is a hard story. Sorry about this part. And they would go to the barn, and they gang raped her in the barn more than once. And she did something really smart. She burned the barn down. Yay for her. And that's where she got labeled the fire setter. And they blamed her. We blamed the victim. And she told, this is what happened, this is what he does, and no one believed her. And she got put in the forensic institution. And we brought her into our agency, and she was with a staff person and 2 other folks. And that staff, we had a very involved plan that involved checking her backpack. And that staff used to make fun of her when they checked the backpack for matches. And they did all the things for, to make sure no fires would be set. And they all laughed at her. And, I finally got a therapist to work with her, somebody I supervised, because we would do therapy inside of the agency. And that therapist came to me and said, Judy's having a really hard time. That staff keeps making fun of her, even though I tell her, stop teasing her, and they're all laughing at her. And she said her brother used to tease her before he would assault her. So Judy's being triggered every day. And so I went to the boss, because back then we didn't consider the homes people's homes. It was the house manager's home. So her name was Pacola. It was Pacola's home. And I said, Judy needs to move. She's really unhappy there, and she's unhappy with Pacola. And he said, well, that's because your behavior plan doesn't work. You have to write a better behavior plan. That was always his answer. And I was like, yeah, it's not that good. You're right. So, I wrote a plan that said, be nice, be nice, be nice. That didn't work either. She just kept doing what she was doing. And one day Judy flipped out. Judy broke everything in the living room. Because she was teased one too many times, and she just flipped, and it was dangerous to her, and it was a trigger. And she broke the flat screen TV. And that, we had just started getting those flat screens, and that was a big deal back then. So here's what she did. She was a very compassionate person. Often I see people with a lot of trauma as having a lot of compassion. She went, and I was there and I saw this. She went to the day program and she started holding small group workshops. She would bring people together. She said, come here, come here, come here. You want to move? And everybody wanted to move. Break your TV, because guess what? Right after she broke that flat screen TV, they moved her to a much better house and she was much happier. And then after that, she got a boyfriend, and that love healed her, and staff supported her. So she started holding these workshops. Just break your TV, she told people. We had 4 TVs broken in the next 6 months, and everybody got to move. Now, Judy's response was trauma. That was a trauma response. Her amygdala was firing. You're in danger. You're being teased. You're being hated. You're not safe. Safety is an emotional issue. But then she taught other people, and their response was behavioral, right? Because they went home and said, bang, 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 I'm breaking my TV. I want to move. Why did they have to have a behavioral response? Because no one was listening. Because they were reduced to using their behavior as power, because they had no power in their life. Both are problematic. We need to support people to heal and to be person-centered and listening and empower people, right? To give them their power back. So Judy knew. Judy taught a good class. Sometimes the behaviors we see are really symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm going to go through the 4 symptom areas. Number 1, re-experiencing. How many of you work with someone who's always talking about someone who died? My mother died, my father died, and you think they just died. And then you find out they died 20 years ago. Well, when someone is talking all the time or re-experiencing something, that's a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, because the past is present. That's an intrusive memory. How about nightmares? Any of you work with folks who have nightmares? We see that, these cycles of repeated nightmares over and over again. Flashbacks, as we said earlier, like Dan seeing that program manager, like, oh my God, she's going to hurt me. I work with one guy where we could not understand why he was getting so upset every other week. Well, every other week, his staff would get to have a lunch break and would come in with a fountain soda. And she said, it's my soda. We're like, that's crazy. It can't be your soda. She said, no, it really is. And she stopped bringing the soda back from lunch. We thought it was just her being gone. Or he calmed down. We don't know what we don't know. So in answer to an earlier question, we may never know, but we have to know, figure out what the triggers are and what safety means to that person. So we had to have a no soda zone. How different is that? You would never expect that, but that's what was the key. Avoidance. You know, many times people will do whatever it takes. They even develop phobias, or they'll shut down totally to avoid being triggered and being traumatized. I work with this one young woman where I'll tell you, everything was about, for her, everything was you know, just about staying safe, but we never got it. When I came to work at this agency, they told me, oh, you can work with Cindy because nobody wants to work with her. And she's spoiled. She's just spoiled. And she's so manipulative. That was the word they always used for her, manipulative. And I'm like, all right, I'll work with her. Well, you know, I was kind of full of myself at the time because I had just gotten my degree. And I was like, well, I do therapy because I'd gone back to school to get my PhD because no one would listen to me. So I paid a lot of money and got tortured for it, but I got it. So now you see me talking all the time. But I was like, people need therapy. And I said, well, I'll do therapy with her. And I started doing therapy with her, but she was always very blank. And she would just recite, you know, I love my mother. I love my stepfather. My father died when I was 5 years old, but my stepfather is like a father to me. Just kind of very, you know, cardboardy. And then her mother was a donor to the agency and on the board. And her mother insisted that Cindy be the receptionist. So that was okay, except the receptionist for the agency, except for sometimes she would hit you. You don't want to work somewhere where the receptionist hits you. And it was usually over food. Sometimes it was when she didn't know who her staff was and she'd go attack the director, who's working with me? Who's working with me? And be very upset and they'd say, oh, she's so manipulative. One time I got hit for some French fries because I wouldn't give her the French fries because she was a brittle diabetic. She had diabetes. And I would say, no, we're not going to give you, I can't give you French fries. And then the French fries were on the floor. I got hit. It wasn't hard. And she was really nice. She would always say to you before she hit you, my OCD is acting up, because she was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder because she was so obsessive about food and staff. And basically, you know, she had a list of things. And so she would say, my OCD is acting up, and then she'd hit you. So at least you got a warning. And I kept trying to do therapy. We had a behavior plan, you know, the behavior plan didn't work. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. She would get very upset when she wasn't able to go grocery shopping with the staff. She wanted to pick out her own food, rightly so. But, you know, they would bring the food and she would get very mad. And then one day, the entire story came out and everything became clear. And here's what happened. She was on the van and the van had a new person that they were dropping off. It was the end of the day. And so it went a different route and they went a different route and they went past the hospital, the psych hospital, Spring Grove in Maryland. And it was wintertime, so she could see it real clearly. And she'd been there as a teenager. And we knew she'd been there. We had a discharge paper. We figured it was for a couple of weeks. And the mother would tell us, well, that's when she was hospitalized was when she got her diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder. And, you know, I had actually a couple of times gone to her psych appointments with her to try to get the psychiatrist to try different medication. I would say the medication's not working. She's hitting people and she's obsessing. She drives by in the van and she starts to cry. I get a call at 9 o'clock at night. She's been crying all evening. She's really upset. The next day, she refuses to go to work. I talked to her on the phone, didn't do any good. She refused to go to work the next day. I went over to the house and we had our first real therapy session. And she told me that when she was 12 or 13, she was very angry with her stepfather, who was very authoritarian and controlling, the one that she said she loved like a father. She actually missed her father. And she got in a fight with him and she was upset with him and angry that he wasn't her real father. And they put her in the hospital and she was there for 3 years. And while she was there, the other patients who did not have a disability did all kinds of things to her. Well, remember, she's a brittle diabetic, right? She was born with diabetes. So they would actually get candy bars and hold them up because she was on that hospital diet. So she couldn't have any sugar and she craved sugar. And they would say, you have to do this sexual favor if you want this candy bar. And she was also sexually assaulted by staff. So what were the things she was obsessed about? She said to me, if I don't go to the grocery store and pick out the sugar-free candy that I like, someone will make me do something for sugar. They could do that. And if I don't know which staff are working with me, it could be a bad staff. She knew that she was trying to stay safe and what she needed to be safe. She had so much trauma from that hospitalization, long term. And it was kind of the family secret that she'd been in for so long. So we don't know what we don't know. But what I've learned is to never assume that anyone is being manipulated or manipulative, excuse me. I never assume that. I never assume that somebody's just doing something for attention. I assume that they're doing it to connect because they're overcome with isolation and loneliness, or they're desperate to stay safe. And there's a whole lot of reasons that they're using their behavior to protect themselves. And they're manifesting symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder on top of it. And that's what was going on. So we changed how we work with her. You know, we made sure that she was involved in interviewing her staff, that she could help select staff, and she helped train staff. I have on my website my book To Celebrate Me, kind of a fun little autobiography. She filled that out and would teach staff who she was and give them a copy of her book about herself. You know, we did all kinds of things to empower her. She met with the nutritionist and they developed a diet that she felt good about. She got to go grocery shopping and we got clear about what sugar-free candy she loved. And she lost 40 pounds. She stopped hitting people. I talked to her mother the other day. Her meds were reduced. She's on very little medication and she's still the receptionist. She's doing so much better because we finally got what it was. We didn't know what we didn't know, right? And we made false assumptions. Another symptom area is negative alteration, cognition, mood. We see where people feel a sense of impending doom, like nothing good will ever happen, no matter how you try to cheer them up or tell them good things are happening. No, it won't. We're going to Six Flags or we're going to the mall and we're going to have fun. No, the van will break down. It always does. And also we see a sense of shame that I'm a bad person. People turn on themselves. Bad things happen to me because I'm a bad person. And finally, that last symptom is the symptom of arousal, where people are in this hyped up state because that amygdala is constantly giving them cortisol and adrenaline and all these chemicals. And they're like, oh no, what's going to happen? What's happening here? What's, you know, so much of the property destruction I see are from people in aroused states who are freaking out, who think something bad's going to happen, and then they're breaking things. 99% of the aggression I've seen has been out of fear, not an intent to hurt someone. And then afterwards, there's so much shame, right? I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Self-harm. Ford and Gomez from 2015 did a big literature review and they said self-harm can be seen as an attempt to cope with intense emotional stress or emotions associated with feeling trapped or damaged. That's it. How many of you work with someone that hurts themselves? The worst self-harm I ever saw, this guy had cauliflower ears from beating himself up all the time, scars all over his face. Turned out, this is a terrible thing to say, and that his house manager had abused him for years and that she and another staff had encouraged the other people to hit him and kind of had a little fight club thing going. And then when he was by himself, he just hit himself. Now, whenever I see self-harm, I always look for, is there abuse going on? What's going on here? Or is that a history, right? And we see that so much. Stephen Hawking says the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge, right? And that's where I went wrong when I thought I knew. I thought I knew. Yeah, this is what's going on with this person. You know, this is what they do. They show off, they manipulate, No. If I were raised as that person was raised, if I had been bullied, if I had been left out, if I had been excluded, I'd be 10 times worse. 10 times worse. So Gabor Mate, you can tell I'm a big fan of his, right? So anything that is wrong with you began as a survival mechanism in childhood, right? So many of these behavioral issues are actually people's attempts to protect themselves. And at one point it might have worked. So, you know, I've seen this so much. I've seen, rather than us trying to fix people, we have to say, well, how can I support you? What do you need to feel safe? So you don't feel like you have to protect yourself. And I bet many of you know a staff or know a person that you can give anybody to. Anyone can work with them. Anybody at all. And that person will calm down because that staff is magic. And that staff knows how to give respect, how to communicate caring, how to listen, how to be emotionally safe, right? I bet everyone can think of someone that you give anybody to that person. They work with them for a couple of months and that person turns around because it's all about safety. It's all about safety, feeling emotionally safe and supported. And I'm going to skip this and go to my triangle, and we'll start with the section on autism. And I'll start with sharing a video with you next time because of the Zoom issues. Who knows what's going on? So I'll have the videos separate, but I'll have them all queued up. But I believe that what people need to heal is they need to perceive themselves as safe. What is safety, right? Safety is when I'm going to be okay and no one's going to hurt me, or I know that their intentions are good and they care about me. Safety is no surprise attacks, right? Connection, people need to not be so isolated and to have friends that are not paid, to have connections, to have relationships, and empowerment, to have real choices, to be able to move their lives forward. This is what people need to heal. This is the triangle for post-traumatic recovery. So I want to end with that and go to questions, and then I'll start with that, and then we'll start next week and we'll talk about autism in particular and trauma, but then we'll go back to the triangle of healing. Okay. Any questions? Oh, I cannot hear you.
I have not seen any questions come through yet.
Well, I can show my video, but I'm a little scared too. Okay, you can still see the triangle even though I stopped sharing. All right, isn't that?
I think she's asking to see the triangle
Oh,
again.
you want to see the triangle. I thought I messed up one more time. Here we go. Safety, connection, and empowerment. These are the keys. You know, years ago, I read the book Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman because I was getting ready to teach a class in trauma. And it just hit me like a lightning bolt because she was one of the first people, by the way, who realized that it wasn't just vets who had trauma. And she talked about healing, and she was working in a hospital, and the nurses of the emergency room said there's women coming in who have bruises and broken bones, and they have crazy stories that make no sense. And we think that they're being abused. And Judith Herman started working with them and doing therapy with them. She was a psychiatrist, she is, and realized how traumatized they were, that they were exactly like the vets with the same level of trauma. And as she treated them, what she realized, and she wrote about it in Trauma and Recovery, was that if they were going home to an abuser, you know, treatment didn't work. And if the abuser had them really isolated, you know, that the isolation they had no hope because they had no friends. They would say, I don't want you talking to your mother. I don't want you seeing your friends. And they were just totally being controlled. Cults do the same thing, right? And then when they had no money and no resources, they just felt hopeless, and therapy didn't help at all. unless they had, a sense of a way. And because of her work, that sense of safety, because of her work, because of Judith Herman's work, they developed those safe houses, right, where people can go if they're being abused and be hidden and get on with their life and get some counseling. I worked at one of them, where they can get counseling and get support. So as I read this, I had reread it, I had read it years ago. I was like, wait a minute, this is what we need to talk about. This is what people with IDD need. They need to know that they're safe, but for them, it's all about, am I emotionally safe? Because we do all kinds of drills, fire drills, everything else. And yeah, we have safe, situations, but they don't always feel safe. Does my staff make fun of me? Like Judy, maybe they'll hurt me. And connections, do they have relationships, or are they isolated in their lives? And then do they have real choices? Do they really have the power to make a choice, or do they have a person-centered plan that sits in a book somewhere or now online, but isn't really real? Are the choices fake? One thing I used to, some of my favorite books on trauma. Oh yes, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is really wonderful. I recommend everybody read The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog by Bruce Perry. That's another wonderful book and so important. Gosh, The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke is really a good book. And I just think that starting to think about trauma and look at trauma makes you see things differently. And staff have trauma too, So Melissa said, how to get a history of trauma from a person who doesn't communicate with words. That's a great question. And that question always comes up. Yeah. And you know what? If that person, you can bring it up to that person and their issues increase. I think the most important thing is helping that person to feel safe. You don't necessarily have to bring up the trauma, and talking about it may end up being a trigger, just like you're saying, because people understand everything. So rather than talking to them about their trauma and what they've been through, talk to them about safety, how we care about you, how you're safe here, how those bad things aren't going to happen to you anymore. How many of you know somebody who's always going to the hospital because that was their safe place when they were being abused? And that's where they got the safety and the support. I work with people right now who keep trying to get themselves back in, right? Because that's the one place they feel safe. And what do you know? Every holiday, that's where they want to go, home for the holidays. Let's see if there's a question in the Q&A. Oh my goodness. Marcia says she knows a senior with type 1 diabetes. Yeah. And she leaves school, won't tell anyone. She has a school job, but she just leaves school for the middle of the day, and this is such a common story, that she has moments and can't describe it, that she's just going through something. And, here's somebody, it appears that she is verbal. I really, really think that therapy would be wonderful for her, to really, so something happened to her. And, she needs a safe place to talk about it. I often also recommend doing expressive therapies with people, like music and art and movement, using collage, but different things like that. Yeah, that's a great question. And something happened. People just don't do things for nothing. There's always a reason. Okay, other questions? Let's see. Now I see more. She's in therapy, but is not honest with the therapist. Yeah. So that's a big problem too, right? So what I have done is I say, and you can approach the therapist and say, can we be involved? Can we have 15 minutes of every session? Can staff come in? Can someone come in? Maybe you can come in and we can talk frankly together. And she doesn't have to disclose anything, but that, she can maybe consent to having a dialogue, letting her know, I really care about you and I want you to get the most out of therapy. So can we do this? Get involved We have to be the bridge because therapists don't get it. And sometimes therapists report us to Child Protective Services, or when that person says, oh, I've been abused. And all of a sudden, the phone calls are being made. And so we have to be involved in a way that's safe for that person, but also in a way that makes the therapy more effective. And in a case like this, it's a great question and a hard dilemma. That's a lot. There's a reason. Any other questions?
I have not seen any others come through.
All right. Well, thank you all for bearing with this. Oh my gosh, for all the ups and downs. Yeah, and Irma, thank you so much for that kind response. I know some of the stories are hard to hear, and I've been in the field for over 35 years, so I have too many stories, but I'll tell you, and the reason I also show the videos, it'd be easier not to, but and tell the stories is because I don't have an intellectual disability, but I want to give voice to those who do. And that's, my quest. So thank you. Thank you all for the work you do. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Karyn. And just as a reminder, we will be back here again next week on Wednesday, same time, 9 to noon. And fingers crossed that we have no technological issues.
I know, but we probably will.
It's okay. We're going to be flexible and we're going to roll with it.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle, for hanging in there. And thank you, everybody, for coming back.
Perfect. We will see you next week.
Thanks. See ya. Bye.